Debt can be a very confusing topic when you're trying to understand personal finance. On one hand, most people want to get out of debt. But on the other hand, you hear stories about really rich people using debt for their advantage. Today, we're going to make sense of this. We're going to talk about the different kinds of debt, how interest rates work. We'll talk strategies on how to get out of debt, but then we'll talk about when you should get out of debt and when you might want to stay in debt. And this is going to unlock some of that mystery on why very wealthy people tend to use debt as a tool to become even wealthier. And in true wealth potion fashion, we're going to use a video game analogy to make sense of debt. We're going to think of debt like Tutorial Island. So without further ado, let's dive in. When you start playing a new video game, oftentimes there's a tutorial. There's a level or stage in the video game which kind of teaches you the ropes. Now in some games, you can skip the tutorial. And just like in real life, this applies to debt. Most of us are going to start our financial journeys in debt. Now, yes, there are some lucky among us that can skip the tutorial and skip the debt stage right away and just start building their wealth. But that is unfortunately not the case for most of us. And one of the biggest reasons for this is student debt. If you go to college or university, you likely have to pay very large tuition fees, and you might have to go into debt in order to pay for that. And that brings us to the first topic we need to cover, which is the different kinds of debts. Because not all debts are created equal, and this has a lot to do with the interest rate. Now, debts can vary in many different ways. There can be different terms, there can be different loan amounts, but it's really important for today's video to understand interest rates. What is an interest rate? It's the amount that you pay to have that debt. You can think of it this way. If you were to lend me $1,000 and then I pay you back 1 year from now, you probably don't just want the $1,000 back. You want $1,000 plus some bit of money for the privilege of me borrowing your money. And that is the interest on the debt. Usually it's displayed as a percentage, and that's an annual interest rate. So for 1 year, you would be paying that percentage of the loan amount in interest. So let's cover some of the different types of debt. We already mentioned student loans. And student loans, I like to think of a student loan as the first boss in a video game. Student loans can be quite large, just like a boss. The loan amount will be large because tuition is expensive nowadays. However, the first boss in a video game usually is not too difficult. In other words, the student loan has a relatively low interest rate compared to other types of debt. Now, you can also think of student loan as the first boss because it's a mandatory boss. There's something unique about student loans, which is that you cannot get rid of a student loan by declaring bankruptcy. You might have heard stories of famous people getting so into debt that they declare bankruptcy. What this basically means is you go to the bank and you say, hey, I am bankrupt, I can't pay this loan, and they will wipe that debt away, but there is a price that you pay, which is that it damages your credit score, which is again something we'll cover later in this video. You can think of bankruptcy as resurrection sickness in a video game. If you've ever revived your character and then your character is kind of weak for a little bit, that's what declaring bankruptcy is like. Yes, it wipes your slate clean, but you are weaker for a period of time. Now, to go back to student loans cannot be wiped away through bankruptcy. So those are student loans. And I imagine most of you watching this either have student loans or have paid off student loans. So you understand how it's kind of like that first boss. Another really important type of debt to understand is credit card debt. Credit card debt is dangerous. It's like that small enemy in a video game that pops up every now and then, but gets stronger if you don't deal with it. And the reason for this is because credit card debts can be relatively small. I mean, you could use your credit card to pay for anything. You could pay for a coffee down the street. However, credit cards have some of the highest interest rates of any debt. If you don't pay your credit card bill in time, that credit card debt can really start to snowball and become much, much bigger. Another really important type of debt that you'll probably encounter later in your journey is a home mortgage. You can think of a mortgage as one of the later bosses in the video game, in that not everyone gets to that level in the video game. It's almost an accomplishment in and of itself to get to the point where you need a mortgage, because that means you bought your first home. However, a mortgage is, again, like a student loan, a very large debt. And although it does have relatively low interest rates, they can really keep people in debt for 10, 20, 30 plus years. Those are the three main types of debt we're going to cover. There are, of course, other debts. There's car loans, personal loans, but those are the three main ones. The reason I use those examples is because, one, they are the most common forms of debt that you are likely to face, especially early in your financial journey, but also because they are perfect examples of debt to illustrate the importance of the interest rate. As mentioned earlier, the interest rate is incredibly important because with a student loan where interest rates can be as low as 4, 5, 6% per year, when you compare that to a credit card loan where interest rates can be 20 or even 25% per year, it's going to help you prioritize which debts to pay off first. And that's going to bring us to the second topic of today's video, is strategies you can use to pay off your debts. And there's two main strategies that have become popular for paying off your debts. And then there's a third one, which is kind of a combination of the two. And those two strategies are the debt avalanche method and the debt snowball method. The debt avalanche method is when you pay off the highest interest rate debt first. So if you have a credit card debt at 25% and you have a student loan at 5%, the debt avalanche method would say pay off the credit card first so that it doesn't turn into a bigger problem in the future. And the debt avalanche method is highly recommended for purely mathematical reasons. By paying off the highest interest debt first and then working your way down to the lower interest rate debts, you are going to pay less in total. So of course, if you want to save money, if you want to build your wealth, you should prioritize the high interest rate debt first. However, there's also a debt snowball method. And the debt snowball method is where you start with a smaller debt and then you work your way up. Now, I generally don't recommend the debt snowball method, but it does have value for people that have somewhat of a mental block or a psychological barrier around paying debts. There are people that are just so paralyzed by how much debt that they're in that it can prevent them from even taking action and paying off debts at all. If you're being honest with yourself and your debt has piled up so much that it's become a psychological challenge for you, I highly recommend looking into the debt snowball method, which basically means you start small, you get a small win under your belt, and then that builds your confidence and allows you to then attack the other debts in your portfolio. And what I would recommend, by the way, is build those small wins and then move to the debt avalanche method. Don't go from small interest rate and then keep working your way up, because again, if you use the debt avalanche method, you're going to be paying less in total. Now, this is where we get into interesting territory because, as mentioned at the outset, not everyone pays off all of their debts. And in fact, there are very, very rich people that use debt as a tool to build their wealth. Again, this goes back to interest rates. And actually, I will share a personal example on how I use this method to build my wealth faster than the average person. I graduated university close to 10 years ago, and I had a debt of close to $40,000 because of my student loans. And because I didn't really have any money saved up, I hadn't started my career, I actually didn't have anything in savings. My net worth was technically negative because I had a $40,000 debt and practically $0 to my name. However, I chose to delay paying off that student loan because the interest rate on it was so low. I've mentioned before that I went to school in Canada and I'm Canadian, and Canada luckily has very generous interest rates for student loans. They can be as low as 3%. I recognized that I could achieve a much higher return on my money than 3% if I were to invest it in the stock market. We lightly touched on this topic in the 5 levels video, and we will touch on it in a future video, so stay subscribed. But in short, I used index ETFs such as the S&P 500, which returns 10% on average per year, and I held on to a debt that was 3%. You can think of it this way. If you had $1,000 in cash and you had a choice to make, you could pay off part of your debt, which has a 3% interest rate, or you could invest in the stock market and make a 10% return. You would, in theory, be making more money by putting it into the stock market. Now, the danger, of course, is that the stock market doesn't always go up 10%. In fact, there are years where it goes down 10%. So you could, 1 year from now, not only lose 10% of your money, but then your debt has just grown by 3%. So you have to measure your risk, but I hope this is a simple example to understand where there are opportunities, especially with low interest debt, to actually hold on to that debt for a long period of time. And so, long story short, I actually opted to pay off my student loan for as long as possible, which I believe was something like 20 years. And so even though I still have some of that student loan to pay off, I have more money now than if I were to simply pay off that student loan right away. The reason I share this personal story is because this is essentially how really rich people use debt, just on a much, much larger scale. They will take on a huge amount of debt to the tune of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars, and then they will go and invest it in something that has a higher return than the interest rate that they're paying on the debt. In investing, this is also referred to as leverage, which is a topic we'll cover in a future video. But what you need to know is that it is a risky strategy, which is why, generally speaking, it's the very wealthy that use these kinds of debt-based strategies, and people that are just getting started tend to not use these strategies and they want to get out of debt right away. But I think it's a really important strategy to understand because, as I mentioned, I did not have money. I was broke, but I still used that strategy to build my wealth faster, recognizing that I was taking on a bit of risk by doing so. Now, as a disclaimer, I also need to mention that your mileage may vary with this strategy. Not only does it depend on stock performance and what you invest in, but also there is a psychological benefit to paying off debt. If you are currently in debt or if you've been in debt before, you know that it can create this emotional tension and feeling where you might be stressed out or anxious because you have this debt looming over you. It's kind of like a curse or a damage over time effect in a video game where you could go about playing the game and ignore the effect, but it might impact your gameplay. Again, your mileage may vary. It really depends on your personality. I did not feel particularly bothered by the fact that I had this debt because I felt confident in my investing ability to be able to build my wealth faster. But it is not for everyone. Now, this brings us to yet another reason why you might want to pay off your debt sooner, which is your credit score. And I love the idea of a credit score because there are some great analogies to the video game world. You can think of your credit score as your experience points or leveling up in a video game. Your credit score is literally a numerical score that the bank gives you based on your performance of paying off debts. And so again, like in a video game, as you defeat more smaller enemies, you're going to build up experience points, your character will get stronger, and in real life, as you get a higher credit score, it unlocks better loans, it unlocks better interest rates, and it can even unlock player housing. You know, when you go to rent your first apartment, if you haven't done that yet, your landlord will likely ask for your credit score because they want to see how likely is this person to be able to pay the rent on this apartment or on this house. And so paying off your debts on time or even early is a great way to build your credit score early in your career. And one of the great tools for this is actually your credit card. Again, even though credit cards are dangerous, they're like that enemy that can grow and become a much bigger problem if you leave it alone. If you defeat your credit card many times, in other words, you use your credit card often, so imagine going to the coffee shop, buying a coffee, and then paying off your credit card right away. If you do that over time, it's going to help build your credit score much faster than, say, paying off your student loans or paying off a mortgage, because a credit card can be a very small loan amount. You just have to get into the habit of paying off your credit card, and your credit score is going to level up real fast. So that covers kind of the main components of debt as it pertains to how you should prioritize paying off your debt and deciding when you want to pay off debt and when you want to keep it. Of course, there's a lot more to debt that we could cover. There's different kinds of debt that we didn't talk about. There's different terms and conditions on various forms of debt, but I really want to make this video as actionable as possible if you are in debt today and if you are at a point in your financial journey where you want to leverage debt to build your wealth faster. So to quickly recap, there are many forms of debt, and perhaps the three most common forms that you will encounter are your student loan, your credit card, and your mortgage. Every type of debt is different, and although they differ in many different ways, one of the most important ways that they differ is in the interest rate. And by understanding the interest rate on your debts, it's going to help you prioritize your debts if you're using the debt avalanche method, or it's going to help you get that small win if you're using the debt snowball method. And last but not least, understanding the interest rates on your debt, as well as your tolerance for risk, it's going to help you decide whether you want to pay off all your debts right away and optimize for a higher credit score, or if you want to pay off your high interest debts, but keep some of your low interest debts to build your wealth faster than you normally would without it. So that's it for today's video. Let me know if you have any questions about debt or if you have any personal situations that you're looking for help on. And I will see you next time when we talk about level 1, which is unfortunately a level that a lot of people get stuck on, which is saving all of their money in cash. If you watched the video all the way to here, I want to say I really appreciate you. According to my YouTube analytics, that's about 20% of you. So thank you so much. If you're not subscribed, I would greatly appreciate it. And I would love to hear your feedback. Is this series interesting to you? What level are you at? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.